For a few years now, one-coat paints like Citadel Contrast are all the rage now. In this video, I rank and review all one-coat paints currently on the market and help you find the best paint for your painting style. I'm Stahly from Tale of Painters and this is my ultimate one-coat paint tier list. Painting with inks isn't exactly new. Remember these or artist inks? Traditional inks usually have quite a low viscosity. They shade the recesses and tint smooth surfaces, but often dry rather patchy and glossy. What makes Contrast and other one-coat paints special is the medium, and the fact that Games Workshop branded them with a fancy marketing term and turned them into a painting system. Contrast has a slightly higher viscosity, and the special formula of the medium not only shades the recesses and makes the paint dry more evenly on smooth surfaces, it also pulls the paint away from the edges. On a light primer, this helps to create basic highlights and thus adds more contrast to a mini. In fact, one-coat paints have become very popular with quite a few brands competing for your hard-earned money. For this ranking, I take a look at all the products that are available at the time of the video. Contrast, Speedpaint 2.0, Xpress Colors, Dipping Inks, Instant Colors and Antithesis paints. We start the tier list with Citadel Contrast from Games Workshop. These are the ones that started the one-coat paint trend, the OGs so to speak. Since they were the first, and since I have the most experience with them, they are my benchmark for all the other paints to come. And there are a lot of things I like about Contrast. With 61 different colors, there is a lot of choice, the colors are highly saturated and vibrant, and the pigmentation is also high. They don't reactivate when they've dried, and Contrast Medium is my favorite acrylic medium ever. But there are also some disadvantages. Varying consistencies across the range, for example. Some colors are rather thin like a wash, others are very pigmented and dark, some settle more evenly, while others produce a more uneven finish. The second wave also added a few colors that are quite opaque and provide not much contrast at all. So there is a bit of a learning curve to understand how each color works. Also, the paints dry very quickly, so you can easily leave visible brush marks if you're not careful. They are the only one-coat paints available in pots, which I personally don't like, and of course, they are by far the most expensive per milliliter. Overall though, I really like working with Contrast, and as I said, they are the benchmark against which all other one-coat paints have to measure themselves, so I'm putting them in the A tier for now. I stick to the chronological order and rank the instant colors from scale 75 next. These were funded as a Kickstarter shortly after the release of Contrast. With 48 colors, the palette is quite large and there are many pastel and muted colors that you won't find in other one-coat paint ranges, which makes this range unique. The paints are available in 70ml dropper bottles and are the second most expensive paints in this comparison, with a price of approximately €4.50 per bottle. Now what makes instant colors so special is the fact that the colors are opaque. Yes, some contrast colors also contain a certain amount of opaque pigments. You probably noticed the white stuff that settles on the bottom of many of the lighter contrast paints. Instant colors formula is not based on an ink basis but on acrylic pigments. But what makes them special is also their biggest disadvantage. As they are not as transparent as other one-coat paints, they are not suitable for painting techniques such as slap chop or sandal highlights, as the opaque pigments will gather in the pre-shaded recesses you want to remain dark. They are also not as rich and vibrant and often require multiple coats to build up a strong color. I think instant colors are good for more advanced painters who like to use them for glazing, weathering and creating more subtle effects. But using them as a one-coat paint as intended, they just lack the dyeing power of other products, and if you expect them to work like Contrast, you will be disappointed. Also, some of the darker colors can reactivate. For now, I put them on the C tier. By no means bad, but they are their own thing and have their own learning curve. Next, Antithesis paints from Warcolours. They are not very well known and for good reason. I'm really sorry, Warcolours does some cool products like the Nostalgia range, but antithesis paints don't work at all in my opinion. Imagine regular acrylic paints thinned with a more gel-like medium. They are far too goopy to settle evenly, and they are opaque and not transparent, and thus don't work for slap chop for the same reasons as instant colors. Honestly, I think you would get better results if you just dilute regular paints with contrast medium. Trash tier. Next we have speed paints from the Army Painter. These were the first one-coat paints that came close to contrast and even surpassed them in some regards like flow properties and affordability. However, the original speed paint formula had the problem that dried paint reactivated and dissolved when you painted over them with wet paint or wet brush. Some people didn't mind this or just used them as intended with no additional layers of paint, or even took advantage of these properties for interesting blending effects. But for my painting style, and in direct comparison to contrast, which doesn't reactivate when dry, I found this too big a disadvantage. That is why I put Speed Paints 1.0 in the C tier. The new and improved Speed Paint 2.0 formula, however, is a different beast. The reactivation is not gone completely, but colors are now much more stable to the point that it's hardly an issue anymore. The Army Painter recommends a curing time of about 2 hours, but unless you want to paint over with a very light color, I found that 30 minutes of drying time should be fine. However, the reactivation-based blending capabilities of the original formula is also mostly gone. I made an in-depth video review about this, check the top right corner. With 90 colors, the Speed Paint range is also by far the largest one-coat paint range, offering more choice than any other. The consistency in pigmentation is more homogeneous than contrast, and the colors are vibrant and rich. The flow properties are still very good. Speed Paint settle evenly but still create a good amount of contrast by pulling the paint from the edges nicely. They work very well for slap chop or just on their own over light primer. The 80ml dropper bottles contain as much paint as a pot of contrast and are more than a third cheaper. I'm slowly warming up to Speed Paint 2.0 as they have quite a lot of nice colors that I can't find anywhere else, like some of the browns and darker skin tones, and I find the reactivation not much of a problem anymore. That's why I'm putting Speed Paint 2.0 in the A tier as well. By the way, the Speed Paint 2.0 range also has 10 metallic speed paints, which are an industry first and something no other one-coat paint range has yet. The metallic speed paints are not bad and will certainly find their fans, but by nature I think they cannot compete with real metallic paints and a wash or dry brush. They are a bit too transparent for my liking, and some have a weird sparkling effect. That's why the metallic speed paints come in the B tier. Next we have Dipping Inks from Green Stuff World. The range has recently been extended from 24 to 36 colors, and what makes these one-coat paints so special is the size of the bottles and the price. A huge 60ml bottle is cheaper than an 80ml pot of contrast, plus the colors are often on sale on Green Stuff World's website. The inks apply well, settle well in the recesses, dry smoothly, and overall provide a good contrast effect. But I have to say that for many colors, the pigmentation and intensity is not as rich as with contrast and speed paint. Most feel more like heavy washes. Think of some of the lighter colors from the contrast range, like Skeleton Bone, Plague Bearer Flesh or Pilar Glacier. That's not a bad thing per se, just know what to expect. But there are also a few real disadvantages. The color palette is somewhat unbalanced. There are a lot of purples and greens, but dark reds, bone colors and greys are missing. Some of the lighter colors are quite opaque, which doesn't work well for slap chop as explained earlier. And with some colors, I have noticed that where a lot of paint collects, they can develop small cracks as they dry. However, I only noticed this with the first 24 colors, but not with the 12 new colors, so maybe this is no longer a problem with recent batches. All in all, Green Stuff World's Dipping Inks present a mixed picture. There are some really sweet colors that I can't do without anymore, and the price is awesome. Makes them even feasible for painting terrain. But due to the limited color palette and the somewhat lower pigmentation, I wouldn't necessarily recommend them to beginners, at least not to build up a core of one-coat paints. I think they're better for expanding an existing collection with a few distinct colors. Therefore, Dipping Inks just barely miss the A tier and come into the B tier, but I would put them before the metallic speed paints. Last but not least, we have Vallejo's Xpress Colors, the latest and, with 23 colors, smallest one-coat paint range. The colors are on the same level as speed paint and thus more than a third cheaper than contrast. As contrast, speed paint and Dipping Inks, Xpress colors are based on inks and they don't reactivate. Yet they have a few perks that make them unique. First of all, the darker colors are a bit less pigmented, so I found you often have to apply 2 coats to achieve a similar result to a single layer of contrast or speed paint. They require a good amount of shaking, but then the colors apply very nicely and the consistency is homogeneous across the range. The drying time is a little longer than with contrast, so there is more working time, making it easier to avoid visible brush strokes. Once dry, they are very matte, which some people prefer, but they also dull metallic paints quite a bit. Overall, Xpress colors settle very evenly and add a good amount of shading to the recesses. They also thin nicely into glazes. However, I feel that the medium doesn't pull the pigments away from the edges quite as much as other one-coat paints. So Xpress colors create a very even finish, but slightly less prominent edge highlights. The biggest limitation, however, is the small range, although I have heard that the range will soon be expanded. Xpress colors may not have quite the same level of pigmentation of contrast or speed paint, but I still like them quite much. They are reactivation free, which is a plus for me, and I feel the slightly lower pigmentation and the more uniform finish make them perfect for slab job and sandal base coats, allowing more of the pre-shading to show through. The matte finish is pretty nice, and if you want to use them for more advanced painting techniques, then you probably won't mind applying multiple coats anyways. For this reason they also, surprise surprise, come in the A tier. And before we take a look at my completed tier list, why don't you smash the like button, subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so you won't miss any of my future paint and hobby reviews. You can also support me on Patreon for exclusive tutorials and resources. Thanks a lot, and here is my tier list featuring all one-coat paints currently on the market. As you can see, we ended up with the A tier being quite crowded and the S tier empty. Actually, I think I need to think about that again. Each of the 3 one-coat paints in the A tier has its advantages, but also disadvantages. With contrast, it would be the high price and the varying consistencies. With speed paint, the reactivation, which has been greatly reduced but still not completely fixed, and with Xpress colors, the somewhat lower pigmentation and limited color range. On the plus side, I like that Xpress colors don't reactivate, as well as the matte finish, and that they complement the slab chop style well. Still, it's not quite enough for me for the S tier, maybe if they can expand the color palette. With Speedpaint 2.0, I like the good flow properties, the large selection and the vibrant and rich colors. There's almost no color that you cannot find. But since the reactivation has not been 100% removed and you also can't blend so well with them anymore, I shy away from putting them in the S tier either. And that leaves us with contrast. Sorry, I don't want to sound like a shill, but I think these would be the ones I would put most likely in the S tier. They were the first. There's a good selection of colors, and even if they don't do everything perfectly, they don't really do anything badly. And once you get the hang of the different consistencies, they become quite intuitive and versatile. But in the end, I decided against putting contrast in the S tier. In my opinion, there is no such thing as the perfect paint range. It's very much up to personal preference. For example, my ideal one-coat paint would have the vibrancy and color selection of contrast and speed paint, with some offbeat colors from the Dipping Inks range thrown in, the flow properties of speed paint, and the longer working time and matte finish of Xpress color. Unfortunately, this doesn't exist yet, but I hope this video will help you find the perfect one-coat paint for your painting style. Remember, there's no need to commit to just one paint range alone. Buy a few colors from the ranges you find interesting and see what suits you best. Personally, I also mix and match my favorite colors from each range. Not only with one-coat paints, but for miniature paints in general, just be willing to experiment a little. For example, with the new Formula Speedpaint 2.0 range, which I reviewed in a critical in-depth video comparing old and new here on the right, so make sure to watch this next. Thanks a lot and happy hobbying!